This is such a pleasure for me to be here today with Emily Bernard, who is the author of Black is the Body. My name is Valda Ford, and I'm your host to talk about this wonderful book. Now, the first thing I want to know is what got you thinking that this would be something you needed to pour out onto pages?
Well, I've been writing since I was very small. That's a very typical story. And I've always been fascinated by just life unfolding around me. My mother was a poet. And so there was never a moment, I think, when I believed that I shouldn't be writing and I shouldn't be telling stories. I think for me, writing is so much about reaching readers. I was a very hungry reader as a child, and I think about the books often that saved me. And when I sort of lack courage or my courage falters, I always remember about that experience of being almost literally saved by a book or known by an author, and it's something I feel compelled to give back.
Well, I can tell you that those who have not yet had the opportunity should take the opportunity to read this. You talk about everything from your own personal experiences to the experiences of your children to even trying to get away for a while, going to a place where you thought you could be with more people who look like you, only to find that the conversations might not have been very much different. So I love it when you talked about, and I'm terrible at paraphrasing, but you talked about the idea of looking at skin and wondering sometimes whether if the person was talking about your skin, if they were talking about color, if they were talking about texture, and you talked about intimacy. Okay, so my background is nursing. So when you told the story about the few people, you can refresh the percentage of people who actually live together who are not the same race, and that intimacy of the bathtub experience where there was the ring around the tub. What was the percentage of people that you say, if you remember, who actually live intimately, who not as lovers, but share the same space as people of different colors?
It's an alarmingly low percentage. And I think it's a consequence, of course, of the segregation that we live with today. Not only are we not intimate in terms of conversation and our daily lives, but in the way we live, where we go to school. My students, for many of them, I am the only black professor they have ever talked to, they've ever had, and some of them have never interacted with a black adult before. And that is a consequence, again, of the demographics of Vermont and New England, but really most places in the country. I think places like Miami are rare, when you are interacting with people of other, who speak other languages and come from other places, either culturally or geographically. So it's really what I read is that our numbers, that desegregation or integration has not accomplished. What can't be accomplished, of course, through legislation, which is people actively sharing their lives together.
You talk about your experiences, and before I go there, I want to go back to the whole thing of the color thing and the tub. Being a registered nurse, that's my background. I remember once someone talking about, I bathe these black people and the bath cloth is black. How dirty they are. And I remember my nursing professor just kind of nodding to it, not engaging a conversation, but the lack of conversation about the fact that skin cells have color as well, and we all shed them. So, of course, the bath cloth is going to be darker because the skin cells are darker. It doesn't have anything to do with dirt. So it's one of those things that helps perpetuate the black is bad thing because black is dirty and therefore not clean. But I love the fact that as a professor, you were talking to students in your class about the N word, which still is probably the most triggering word anywhere. You can add sand in front of it if you're talking about people of the Middle Eastern background, but that's still such a charged word. How were you able to really, with this one young man who was so, I guess he was so with it, he was able to write this paper?
Well, the bathtub scene is one of my favorite scenes in the book. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a woman who actually attends my church, and she's the one who was puzzled by the fact that a young black man who was effectively who was her godson, had been spending some time at her house and left a ring inside the tub, and she was sure it had to do with his brown skin.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to tell her, well, he worked on a farm, so that was probably. But she had these conceptions, and it was surprising to me because it's 2019, and that she would make that connection was just astonishing to me. But I thought it was also, I think as teachers we often think about the classic teachable moments,
Mm-hmm.
and I shared that story with my students, and I do share these stories with them. And not to condemn this person, but to say this is how many people think. I mean, she's not someone I'm terribly close to,
Right.
but she is a person in the world who is not malicious, but living in a culture where, again, there's just ignorance around racial difference.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the N-word essay that I wrote many years ago, and I had a white student, who was very much an insider, if you will, when it came to music and black culture. He had immersed himself in a black cultural world, and he wrote a paper with that word on it. That essay I wrote that a long time ago, and I don't know that I would have such an accepting attitude as I get older, and see how the word continues to really harm people.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly, in recent years, made the decision not to use the word when it comes up in my research and I'm giving a paper, or when I even read from this essay. I think it's very different to read an essay in solitude than it is to have that word spoken to you in a public forum. And I've had too many readers, for instance, on the road who've talked about the word and how much it has injured them, even among, again, people in an audience who are, just referring to my own essay that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
So I make the choice now when I read from that essay to tell my readers I'm not going to use the word out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the reading experience, the solitary reading experience, is different than hearing it spoken, and I respect that.
I know that you had many experiences that you talked about with people who would remark on color, or they might say, oh, your skin is beautiful, and they may specifically be talking to a person who probably had fairer skin, and they were doing that not recognizing the whole issue of colorism. Have you found any people who have reached out to you since you've written a book who've said, I deal with this every day. Thank you for putting this into words that maybe I might have this conversation?
Absolutely. That's been the most rewarding part of writing this book. And as I said to you earlier, for me, writing is so much about being in conversation with the reader. I would never want my work it would be so heartbreaking, the work to just sit on somebody's table. The fact that it's made its way into conversations has been very gratifying. And I've heard from many people of color who've told me that they've used this work to help initiate conversations with, white acquaintances. They can refer them to these essays. Mm-hmm. And that really makes me feel so satisfied. Mm-hmm. And also, I write a lot about adoption. I'm an adoptive parent. And I've had several young people who were adopted by their parents who told me that they've used some of those essays to break ground with their parents and help articulate feelings they were too worried about sharing with their parents. And that has also been an unexpected prong of reward from having
Mm-hmm.
written this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that I've done some work with diversity and inclusion, mm-hmm. and I remember being in a small town in Nebraska where I was talking to a group of all people who were not black, because Nebraska doesn't have a large population of non-white people. But at the end, people were waiting to talk to me because we had opened up some lines of communication, and this elderly woman, who probably was about 87 at the time, very frail, she had that rice paper skin, and she walked up to me, and the people who were my handlers basically said, you could see them going like, uh-oh, here's Edna. And that's not her name because I wouldn't use it. And as she got closer, she just said, may I touch your skin? and they were rushing to my aid. But I was like, no, leave her alone. Number one, generationally, I'm going to accept a whole bunch of things. And so she touched my face, and she just said, and started to walk away. And I said, oh, wait. What was that about? And she said she wondered if my skin felt like hers because she'd never had the opportunity to be close enough to a person of color to touch them. Secondly, that she felt that I would allow her to, and so I was glad that I did. But so many people aren't going to have that experience that I had or the experience that you had, but your book leads them to the opportunity to talk about color, what it means, the weight of the words that are used, their unintentional slights because they don't understand that whole colorism piece.
Absolutely. I so empathize with that experience you just described. And I always feel that it's important for people of color to give ourselves permission to go with our gut. And in those moments when it feels invasive, to say no. But then I've had the same experience you've had where I thought, okay, this is an elderly person who simply hasn't had the experiences that young people have today, and I can make room for this right now. And again, it doesn't mean that I want to see this person every single day or to be touched all the 24/7, but I can let this happen right now, and I can assess in a moment that's not going to have a lot of cost to me, and I might actually help someone. I mean, I think I often say I'm an educator by nature and profession, and so the opportunities to make transformations are always going to be appealing to me. And sometimes, you realize later the cost was great. And sometimes a person you realize later didn't have the best of intentions. But I try to forgive myself and carry on. And the same goes for those moments when I don't feel like doing the education. I think we have a term, a lot of friends I have in Vermont, about race fatigue. Yeah. Because we're often called on to be that example or to speak for that group. Yes. And sometimes some of us need to beg out and say, not today. And then someone else takes the baton and keeps going. Because I think for me, living in Vermont, there is a component of education that kind of comes with citizenship, where you just either you are going to do that work or you're going to stay inside. Right. And so, but we have to give ourselves permission also to beg out when we don't feel like it.
Wow. Well, I want to tell you that I have enjoyed reading this and will continue to read it because you can take each chapter and just read it singly as compared to, okay, I don't know why I'm starting here. And that gives such a great opportunity for people to use a single chapter as an opportunity. And the one on intimacy, I'm telling you, that really, really struck a chord because I don't think I've actually had that conversation very much. Even though I had that experience as a nursing student where even the teacher didn't say, well, it's okay for there to be a ring around the tub. That's why they make products to clean it. Or this person was working on a farm, and so, of course, it would be dirty. Or skin cells have different colors, so therefore they will leave different rings.
That's right.
Your work is wonderful. It is something that we need to have because there's so many people who don't have the opportunity to have this conversation. So, Emily Bernard, I appreciate you, I thank you, and I hope you continue with this great work.
Thank you so much for having me today.
It's my pleasure.